Hey, friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
And welcome back to Going in Raw, the only pro wrestling podcast you need to be listening to. We're going to pause from our usual slate of news recap / questions to discuss, as many of you had asked us to do, the Bray Wyatt documentary that aired on the Peacock streaming service that WWE put together. You know, there was a report, a rumor, whatever. I think it was Fightful, if I'm not mistaken, because we had talked about why WWE wasn't putting him, Bray, into the Hall of Fame this year. And I thought it was very interesting, especially after having watched this documentary, completely understandable. The reason being because it's still a relatively fresh thing, the stress of putting the family through even a celebratory moment like a Hall of Fame induction would probably be too great. You and I both dealt with, you know, the concept of grief last year when we lost our good friend, the Enforcer. My father passed away as well in 2023. And I know that given our relationship as fans to wrestling and having an appreciation for what these performers do for us as fans, the last like 15 minutes of this documentary especially are incredibly powerful, are incredibly difficult to watch. And so we're going to talk about all that today, and we're going to talk about what we really took away from the documentary.
Yeah, the last 15 minutes hearing and seeing JoJo relive the panic of, you know, walking into their bedroom and realizing that, you know, Bray, as she put, had a heart attack, and recounting what happened, seeing the devastation, or hearing about it from Taylor, Bo Dallas, from Micah, their sister, from their mother and father. It's, you know, it's obviously a massive and devastating loss for the family first and foremost.
Yeah.
You know, and Bray has 4 children.
I think 4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah, and it's incredibly difficult for the family, and you know, one of the more kind of powerful stories that Taylor told was, you know, when they learned the news that Bray had passed, and you know, he said it was the saddest moment in my life, but he felt like Wyndham was telling him, "You got to be strong with the family," and he says his mom had basically collapsed on the floor in grief, and he goes and picks her up, and her mom says he picked me up and his hands felt so large,
Yeah,
you know, as in to say, like, the power of his embrace, and it was so great. You know, and to see the bond of that family going back to when they were kids and seeing how they have all come together, dealing with the tragic loss, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and like, I'm sitting there watching it, and like, I have a thing I had to go to at my kid's school right afterwards, and so I'm crying. I got tears streaming down my face watching this at the end, and I have to try to wipe the tears away and make myself presentable to go to a thing at the kid's school, and I'm like, it's on my mind, and it's been on my mind ever since I watched it this morning.
Yeah. You know, there was one line especially that hit me hard when Taylor said, "You've seen this scene 1,000 times in movies.
Yeah.
But until you've actually lived it, you don't understand." And that hit especially hard because I was there hours prior to my dad passing, and then I got the call at 3 a.m. from my mom, "Hey, you know, come over here." And I knew exactly what she meant. Either it was clear that it was about to happen or it had happened. And I go over there, and, you know, sure enough, my dad had passed, and, you know, sitting there with, you know, his body was an experience that was, nobody can prepare you for what that is. Nobody can. And not every scene in every movie, nothing. And that really resonated. And it's a horrible feeling. And it probably, you know, in my situation with my dad, you know, my dad was 71 years old. And so it's like he he lived almost to what they call life expectancy. I don't know what it is now. It's mid-70s, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But he got that whole life, and he raised children that are nearing 50 years old. Well, Wyndham's kids are young. They're like, I think most of them are younger than our kids. Or some of them are anyways. And for a brother and really a mother and a father to lose their child before they go. I mean, that's kind of our hope as fathers is I want to live well into Alabama's adult life so that she is at least prepared not to have this security blanket anymore. And my dad did make it that far. And, as much as I miss, the emotional connection I had with him, he raised us and set us up to the point where we're fine. And for parents to see their own son go before they go, I can't imagine that pain. That's got to be a whole other level. Yeah. And to see the entire family recount those sad, moments was especially heart-wrenching and pretty devastating to watch. And they did. I thought that overall the documentary did do just an outstanding job of illustrating how creative an individual and really what a creative individual of that type, of that magnitude, is like.
Yeah.
Before we dive into that, I did want to mention this also. Having seen so many episodes of Dark Side of the Ring, it was actually incredibly heartening to see. And they didn't really even dive into it much, but Mike Rotunda, IRS, seemed to raise that kind of family. And I can only go based off of my own family. Me and my sister are very close. My parents were all a very tight group. We moved around a bunch. We moved to Europe when I was a kid, and I think that helps bond people. But, there's never been, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, there's never been any competition between my sister and I. We've always been each other's biggest fans. And it was really, really nice to see, a contrast from what we usually see in the wrestling world, which is wrestler is shitty dad. We've seen that so many times.
Yeah.
And in this case, IRS, who had a hell of a career.
Yeah.
Not like world champion guy, but still like
a successful working wrestler for 3 decades, traveling all over the world.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Hell of a career.
Yeah.
And raised a family that all just loved each other and supported each other and seemed normal and wanted to be around each other. And it was so lovely to see that side of pro wrestling, which probably is more often than not. But, the salacious stuff, and, that's not shade to Dark Side. I love Dark Side of the Ring. We're friends with the creators. Those are all fascinating stories.
Yeah.
But there is another side, and maybe it's just because it's boring that, watching a suburban family be successful because of a wrestling career isn't the most compelling thing in the world, but it is awesome to see. And I love to see that in this.
Oh, definitely. It is the other side of the coin. People who wrestled in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's a lot of stories of how their careers and lives have gone wrong. And it is good to hear about, a story of a family that was very tight-knit, even though their wrestling father was probably gone 300 days of the year, and the way they support each other and always seem to have each other's back. They were each other's, most prominent cheerleaders, seemingly, advocating for the siblings and the parents for their kids. It's great. It's great to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Some of the, instead of just sort of going beat by beat and retracing the entire documentary, we thought it would be more interesting to sort of just give you guys our biggest takeaways. I mean, obviously we talked about, his passing and all that, and maybe we'll circle back around.
We're huge fans of process.
Yeah.
We like learning about process. And so I think immediately that's one of the things that stood out from this. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No, go
we'll
ahead.
just jump right into it. And to see him go from playing football, seeing his brother going to WWE developmental, seeing him wrestle and be like, nope, I'm doing this now. And then in seemingly a matter of, I mean, if you get past the Duke Rotunda and the Husky Harris characters,
Yeah.
seemingly once he discovered Bray Wyatt, we learned some of the inspirations. We knew about the Waylon Mercy because we've heard that before, but in terms of taking inspiration from a friend of his from his hometown, he took his first name, Bray. He had a cousin named Wyatt. There's the name. And, maybe the seed of the inspiration was Dan Spivey's Waylon Mercy character, but taking it to whole other levels and seemingly very quickly.
Yeah.
It seems like, he obviously in the W developmental, you workshop stuff a lot, especially from the character perspective. But it seemed like as soon as he discovered who that character was, it clicked, and it seemed like it was almost fully formed at that juncture. You see those early promos, and it's his cadence, his tone of voice, a little different, but it's there.
It seems like the kind of thing that came just from pure inspiration. You look at Waylon Mercy, and I didn't know about Waylon before. I mean, I kind of knew about Dan Spivey, but I didn't really know about that character until after Bray Wyatt, and people would say, "Oh yeah, his inspiration clearly was Waylon Mercy." And then of course I'd also heard about the Cape Fear reference with De Niro, and it's clearly there, but the level with which Bray Windham connected to this character and understood it immediately, it is one of those things that's like almost divine intervention, seemingly. When as a you and I have dabbled in the creative before, and there are times when something will just come to you and it happens so easily, because it just clicks. And there are certain characters in wrestling where clearly it just clicked. I imagine once Cena unlocked the Doctor of Thugonomics, was like, oh, I get this completely. I know exactly how to do this. And
I mean, I think one of the most obvious examples, I think, is Stone Cold, someone who, for a good portion of the early part of his career, wasn't really a character. He was an in-ring guy. When he was stunning Steve Austin at WCW, he was known as a ring technician. That's why he was a ringmaster when he was brought into WWE. And he discovered that character, and bang, it all just clicked. It all came together at that point.
Yeah. When you see, Rocky Maivia find The Rock, it's like, oh, okay, there's not a whole lot more that you need to work on there. You just, And so what's interesting is just how fully formed the Bray Wyatt character came together, or how quickly he became fully formed. Because you're right, you see those early FCW promos, and it's like, oh man, that's totally just there. You just know what you're doing. And it's interesting that, it sprang sort of from the failure of Husky Harris. Like, sort of to dovetail into one of my other takeaways here with regards to Husky Harris, and, everybody basically saying, this was an unfortunate play off of his weight. It was, they obviously they put him in some trunks. Whereas obviously before in his career, he was wearing a shirt. He was wearing not stuff similar to Bray Wyatt, but in terms of like how it fit him, it was similar to Bray Wyatt, sort of looser stuff that still looked really cool. And then, they basically just put him out there in what amounts to underwear, which is typically what wrestlers wear. And sometimes it works really well, even for heavy set wrestlers. But in his case, it clearly wasn't something he was comfortable with. And then you have the name Husky Harris, which is a play on his weight. And it reminds me of the stories that we've heard about Vince McMahon and how shitty he could be to Bray when they wouldn't see eye to eye. What he would resort to? Calling him out on his weight. And what was interesting about this was, and I noticed this in the clips that I've seen from the Roman Reigns documentary, is that I wonder if now, because there's so much more success with a lot of these characters without Vince McMahon, and because Vince McMahon's not there, getting in the way of these people realizing what they could do, realizing their full potential. There was one clip of them at when Bray came back this last time, and he comes back to Gorilla, and he's like, man, that felt really good. That felt so great. It was either that or it was when I think it was that.
It was when he came back at Extreme Rules.
And Triple H says, this is only the beginning and it's going to get so much bigger.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like what the Triple H era is.
Yeah.
It's, I appreciate your creative, and man, we can do so much with this character, as opposed to, God damn, pal, that wasn't what I was looking for. Like that kind of bullshit that they seem to get before.
Yeah, and Triple H, while acknowledging the challenges of working with someone as wildly creative as Wyndham, as Bray Wyatt.
Yeah.
That it seemed like it was at times difficult to get him to channel his creativity towards one goal.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a second.
But I'm getting to how Triple H, with that in mind, it seemed like for Triple H, that's a challenge that he looks forward to taking on, because he's dealing with a creative individual that's got a wealth of ideas that will challenge him, that will push him, and therefore the overall goal of leading the character to greater success. Whereas with Vince, it would seem like, oh, you're standing up to me. Now you got me doing the voice. You're standing up to me. How dare you? Punishment,
And what's interesting, dude, is that whether it's Roman Reigns in his A&E bio talking about, well, this isn't me. Like, I don't agree with this stuff. And I don't know in that bio, because I didn't watch the whole thing yet. I plan to, if they directly referenced Vince, but in this Bray one, they didn't.
Nope.
The only executive really guy that they talked to was Pritchard, which they talked to him pretty extensively, but they didn't even reference Vince in this. And what's interesting about that is I wonder if the more of these documentaries, because like everybody seemingly had an issue or had that butting of heads with Vince over him thinking he knows more about their character, when Vince had lost touch ages ago.
Decades ago, yeah.
Ages ago. And so I wonder if that's going to be a common thread the more of these documentaries do.
It could be the underlying theme of there was always frustrations and difficulties with creative.
Yeah.
You know, any wrestler who wrestled with the company all through the aughts or the 2010s or the 2020s, the constant butting of heads, and very rarely, I'm sure you could point to examples where there was a decent creative partnership, probably John Cena, maybe a couple other people, where there's a lack of creative fulfillment for the performers.
Yeah. Yeah. And how they're going to basically dance around Vince McMahon because they're not going to mention him. They're not going to show him. No. But that frustration, it's going to be interesting to see how various people they are going to dance around that Vince McMahon thing. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting that, and Triple H is funny because the way they kind of dance around it is Triple H is making allusions to that. There was some sort, I think he says something like, there was some sort of disconnect. I don't know exactly, even though he knows clearly he has to dance around it. Yeah. I don't know exactly what happened there. And so, it fell apart. And that's when, Bray was released, when we all know it was just Vince. He didn't understand it.
This episode of Going in Raw is sponsored by BetterHelp, Steve.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I feel like my social battery ain't what it used to be. The weather's getting warmer. Winter, it's on the way out. I've been attending a few get-togethers, and I kind of feel like I'm ignoring my social battery level and starting to spread myself and my social energy a bit thin.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. And I've often asked myself, what's the right amount of socializing for Steve? And how do I recharge my social battery after I socialize?
Yeah, I ask myself those same questions all the time. And whether you thrive around people or feel like you need some time alone, therapy can give you the self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. Back when I was dealing with severe anxiety in my mid-20s, my social battery was basically running on empty. But therapy helped me learn the tools I needed to better cope with my anxiety so I can get back to feeling comfortable in social situations.
And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is completely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. All you got to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge.
Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/raw today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP. tmp.com/raw.
And you're absolutely right. To circle back to Triple H, you're absolutely right. It was fascinating to see how, and Triple H, back when Bray came back at Extreme Rules, I think in the media scrum even said as much. You know, he's a bit of an asshole, but he's our asshole, and he's so interesting to work with. But that was one of my other major takeaways, is we got to see all the frustrations of a high-level creative mind, where your personal life, when you go through ups, you're inspired. When you go through downs, that inspiration can vanish like that.
Yep.
It can dry up, and so much of it is directly related to what's going on in your personal life. When he was going through his divorce, he went through a creative, valley. When, he finds new love with JoJo, has a new kid, a creative peak. And so I thought that stuff was incredibly interesting. They so accurately were able to portray. But as you and I had always talked about, I laughed out loud.
Oh yeah, the Triple H line. Yeah.
You and I always talked about the deal with Bray. He obviously has so many ideas, but then you got to run ropes. At a certain point, you're in the ring running ropes, and how do you reconcile the two?
Yep.
And Triple H's way of putting it was almost the exact same.
Yep.
You've got me, you've hooked me, I'm intrigued by all these ideas, but at the end of the day, the bell goes ding, ding. That's how he put it.
Yeah.
And dude, I gasped, because I'm like, that's what me and Larson were saying. How do you reconcile them? And the fucking tragic thing is, dude, I have no doubt that Triple H was so geeked out to try and
reconcile that. Yeah.
And reconcile it. And,
find the bridge,
crack the algorithm with him.
Exactly.
And you see almost the giddiness in Triple H's face in that backstage gorilla bit, where he's like, this is going to be so much bigger. Him and Rob Fee and Bray all on the phone together to be a fly on the wall for those conversations.
I know.
Where they're just trying to figure it out. And it seems like, man, I want to crack this, because we all know it could be huge.
Yeah.
And we never got that opportunity.
And that's kind of, and looking back at Bray's career, which highly accomplished, and obviously incredibly beloved by wrestling fans all over the world, because it's always interesting with Bray, because the through line through so much of his WWE career was he'd get to a certain point and the bond would fall out. Mm-hmm. It always seemed like you can go back to the WrestleMania 30 match against John Cena. Mm-hmm. If he had won that, you're off to the races. You got instant main event guy there, and whoever's call that was to win the match, Vince ultimately, whatever the reasoning was behind it. You can look at several instances where if they had gone a different direction, Vince had gone a different direction creatively, the legend of Bray Wyatt would have grown tenfold.
Mm-hmm.
For all that he did, and for how much the fans appreciated his obvious creativity. Mm-hmm. I always go back to that bit where Triple H was champion after winning the Rumble, and Bray and the family get in the ring, and Bray just runs the back of his finger across the title, and the electricity that you could feel through the TV in that arena.
Yeah, it was pretty special.
About the possibility of something like that happening.
Yeah.
That was the power of Bray, that even though in the fallow creative periods, I think us as wrestling fans would see him and be like, it could be a flip of the switch, and he's right back on top.
Oh yeah.
It just takes one thing.
Yeah.
And even I know there was periods of his career where I was highly critical of the creative in saying they got to turn this around. They got to turn this around. They got to make a concerted effort to turn this around. You would always say, no, it just takes one story or match, and he's right back on track.
Yeah.
And that was the connection he had. That I think in the end you were right that people were so invested in his creative mind and what he could do, and because of that, they wanted to see him succeed.
And I also think it was clear that, the fact that Vince did put that title on him at Elimination Chamber, and he lost to Randy, but then when the Fiend showed up, eventually he got that Universal title. I mean, even Vince McMahon saw, man, this is something that we could crack. Vince was never going to be the guy to really crack it.
No.
But he did. You could tell that Vince wanted it to be cracked, like he saw, man, this could be huge. He wasn't the guy to do it. And I think probably was much less equipped to try and translate Bray's vision into the ding ding running ropes than Triple H would have been.
Well, because Vince would always try to really shoehorn wrestling tropes into what is very much, depending on the iteration of Bray, for example, the Fiend era, very much a horror movie villain.
Yeah, right.
And rather than trying to find the connective tissue between the different genres, was trying to shoehorn wrestling into a horror movie, essentially.
Yeah.
And I, like, people criticize, and I get it, the Hell in the Cell match against Seth Rollins. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what Bray's initial vision for it was. Mm-hmm. I think we're like the only two people who, to a degree, defended it because I at least saw what they were trying to do.
It was clear as day that it was simply honoring horror movie tropes.
Yeah.
And it made it, honestly, to me, to this day, it still made all the sense in the world. I understand people weren't into it. I get it. It's just where we're going to differ and whatever. But yeah, from when he came out as the Fiend, and you think about his, the various theme songs he had, which were all really good.
Oh, he knew presentation. He knew presentation and the importance of presentation.
Yeah, he absolutely did. I thought let's pivot a little bit here to one of I know it's one of your takeaways too. Process of creating the Firefly Funhouse match, which was probably peak cinematic match from pandemic era.
Without a doubt. And it's interesting to watch the clips from that along with Chris Van Vliet's junket interview with John Cena recently about that.
Yeah.
Where Cena talks about, I'm happy you sent that clip to me. That he found out what the Firefly, he found out they were having a Firefly Funhouse match, but no one had any idea what it was going to be.
Yeah.
And the way John Cena recounts it is he came upon the idea, let's make it like a real meta thing looking back at our careers.
Somebody walked in while they're in a conference room and said, "You've got a Firefly Funhouse match. What is it? It's up to you." And whoa, we have a blank slate. I mean, how awesome is that for John Cena to be like, okay, I would imagine so many other wrestlers would be like, man, I got to come up with something. Like, what is that? Like, what are we going to do?
It'd be easy when you find out 2 days before you got to shoot this thing to have analysis paralysis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, what do I do? And panic. But, seemingly he went back to his house or hotel, whatever, got the notepad out and started writing stuff.
Yeah.
Had it printed out, went to Bray. They were shooting ideas back and forth. And the way he tells it, it's like, I'd pitch an idea. Bray would make it better.
Yeah.
Bray would pitch an idea. I'd roll with it.
Yeah.
And in terms of like essentially an experimental short film about the facade of wrestling, I don't know how you can get a smarter take on it than that.
And for John Cena, a Mount Rushmore level guy, in terms of name recognition in the industry all time, to have basically been the spark behind this. Let's do a meta commentary, a video essay on my career, and being completely and totally 1,000% self-aware of every detail is absolutely mind-blowing.
It is. Every detail, every criticism, seemingly every bit of fantasy booking.
Yeah.
Being aware of it all and working it into an essay, as you said, virtually, about not just his own career, but again, like the concept of this weird amalgam of reality and not that is pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And how reality plays into it. It was, I've maybe seen it once since we watched it WrestleMania. I need to go back and revisit that because it's a tremendous piece of work. It really is.
It really is. And for Bray to be sort of the facilitator of that and what a perfect, a perfect collaboration, a perfect opponent to do that with. And it's like, man, I have no idea what the plan would have been had they, I have no doubt that Cena, who was already kind of, he was definitely part-time at that point.
Oh yeah.
I imagine he was probably always going to lose to the Fiend, and that would have been kind of a big deal. But I wonder if they would have been able, or if they would have had the idea to get meta at all with it if it was a standard stadium match. I don't know what you could do. Maybe to a degree they could have tried to recreate the WrestleMania 30. Here's a chair. Go ahead
that would have been the most obvious reference they could make. Yeah, definitely. But then your worry is WrestleMania 33, the Brays match against Randy Orton. And I understand that wasn't necessarily rooted in any sort of meta commentary on their careers or wrestling in general.
Presentation-wise, it could have been exactly the same, and
it could have been something
really
like
underwhelming.
that. Yeah, no, where instead of projections of bugs or something, you have projections of the prototype stepping up to Kurt Angle.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
which would have been underwhelming if the idea is like, oh, I'm gonna take you through like a trip through your career, John Cena, and make you realize you've been a fraud this whole time or something like that.
Yeah. It's funny because it seems like it'd be easy for John Cena to be not terribly self-aware, but everything that I've seen about him over the past couple of years indicates the extreme opposite. Yeah. He is keenly aware of every single thing that encompasses his career. And that to me is incredibly fascinating. And I think it's sort of, I haven't seen Ricky Stenicki yet, but when you think of like the Peacemaker show and how bizarrely deep that was and layered and textured his character is in that, it's something else that he would choose those roles. And you just love to see it because it completely, bucks a lot of conventions about what you think about a pro wrestler or a movie star, action star or whatever. It's the kind of self-awareness that I feel like The Rock doesn't really have. And which is kind of a shame because I thought early in his career, he might've been showing that, like choosing to do Southland Tales. Oh my God. But maybe that made him run away from that kind of shit.
That could be. Who knows? But you got someone like Dave Bautista, who is going out and pursuing complex, challenging roles.
Oh yeah. And
it's great to see. I mean, you'd think the easiest path from wrestling to Hollywood is just do action movies.
Yeah.
I
think The Rock wanted to build an empire, and I think that's what he wanted to do. Cena does seem he seemed like an incredibly. I'll never forget watching that video of him reacting to his debut against Kurt Angle, and just how introspective. I mean, man.
Oh, he was dumping on it almost to a comedic degree.
Yeah.
But doing it completely straight faced.
Yeah. It was absolutely nuts. Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Because we've sort of touched on all of my takeaways except for one.
Okay.
I got this question a lot, and I don't recall getting it over at Going in Raw, but I do remember getting it bizarrely a lot at WrestleJuice. And I think maybe because Bray passed like in close proximity to both like the Enforcer and my Bray passed like right after I think my father. It was like August, I think.
It was August, yeah. It was August, yeah.
It was like the next week or something. And so I think one of my WrestleJuice videos was just me talking about grief in general. And some people are asking the question, would you like to see, or should they continue the Bray Wyatt universe using the characters that they already have established? And back then, I didn't know that there was a way forward. They teased it at the end of this. And one thing they didn't dive into necessarily was, where was the Uncle Howdy Bray Wyatt relationship / story going to go? And they tease the idea of Bo Dallas continuing on this story. You've got Alexa Bliss, who, I started to tear up big time with Braun Strowman.
Yeah.
Because Braun honestly comes off, and he's always come off this way, as a super gentle giant, as an incredibly sensitive guy who is in the body of a monster.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that alone was kind of untapped potential with Braun Strowman that we've seen flashes of. But for how close he was to Wyndham and how Alexa Bliss seemed to just love working with him, which is not shocking given that Alexa Bliss does seem to be an incredibly smart, savvy person. And with her looks, you would understand why Vince would probably want to shoehorn her into a certain role, but she clearly, thanks to Wyndham, understood that she could do so much more.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, the match itself might have ended with a whimper, but her emerging from that gift box with all that, black goo and stuff.
Ooze running down her face, yeah.
I thought that was such a powerful singular image that they never did anything with.
Nope.
Do you think it would be a testament to him, if handled respectfully, to continue on in some story form, especially now under Triple H, who would take this in a respectful way? Bo Dallas as Uncle Howdy, with Rob Fee, one of the creative minds behind the Bray Wyatt stuff, also helping along the creative aspect of it. Do you think it would work?
Well, before I answer that question, they did go and show what the next iteration of the Fiend was going to be.
Yeah.
Different masks, slightly different ring gear. So at some point, what Bray was doing with the Uncle Howdy stuff was going to lead to that. Now, whether Uncle Howdy was going to bring the Fiend back out of Bray, don't know. They did not address where they may have been going with that, but that could be because we could potentially see that after the credits roll. We get the lantern lighting up, and we see a figure which looks like a mask, some sort of horns or something on it.
Yeah.
Standing behind it, which you would assume is Bo Dallas, because he made reference to continuing Bray's legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if Vince was still in charge, I would be cringing at the thought of them continuing, because it would not have been handled respectfully.
Not at all.
What we've seen from Triple H so far, I have a lot more faith that he would handle this with the sensitivity and respect that it would deserve.
Yeah.
Taylor Bo Dallas is incredibly invested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd be curious to see where it goes if they were to revisit it.
Yeah.
And how they would revisit it, and how broad they go with it in terms of bringing back former characters or not.
Mm-hmm.
The thing at the end was obviously a tease for something. What that is, we don't know quite yet. But it seems they're going in some direction with Bo as it relates to the overall Bray Wyatt mythos. So, I'm intrigued to see where it goes, because I think the creative minds behind it are really invested in doing it right.
If done properly, it could be huge. Bray really should have been, and it was great to hear Undertaker doing narration. I shouldn't say Mark Calloway, because it wasn't Undertaker. No. Him saying, my career needed some rejuvenation, but so did Mark Calloway. and I got that.
Suffered from some lack of confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if Bo would be able to get to those levels. I think it's kind of premature to say that. But if handled properly, if you inject this, the line between reality and fiction in pro wrestling is the kind of thing that, when done really well, using real life situations to pay respect to that, when done well, it can be as powerful, emotional as any, powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you were to do this, showcasing the several sides of Bo Dallas, on one hand, a guy who's suffered through tremendous loss, and at the same time, a very creative person who's intent on cementing his brother's legacy or carrying on his brother's legacy, and you don't come close to approaching exploitation. Yeah. There's some really interesting avenues that they could take with that. And if they were able to pull it off, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it could be
some really compelling stuff, unlike anything we've seen in wrestling before.
Yep.
So I really hope that they do try, and I think that it would have the goodwill of the fan base. I mean, that's the biggest sea change to me from Vince to Triple H has been just how much benefit of the doubt they have from me. At this point.
I think you are a microcosm of wrestling fandom at large, or us, because obviously we both give Triple H and the current creative administration there the benefit of the doubt far more than we would ever give Vince. And knowing that they would enter into this story with the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, not be exploitative with it all, which would be one of the dangers with Vince involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I think people would definitely be invested in it, knowing that all right, they're going into this best of intentions, they're going to be respectful of Bray's legacy and doing this to honor it as opposed to pivot from it to try to make $1.01.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Any last words about this? Any other takeaways that you wanted to bring up?
I recommend people check it out if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Again, getting to the creative process of everything is fascinating. Hearing Jason Baker talk about their relationship, their creative process. Apparently, Wyndham taught himself how to paint and draw after he was released.
Yeah, and he was pretty good too.
All that sketch of Uncle Howdy was amazing.
I know.
So,
that was nice.
There's a lot of little details in there that we haven't mentioned yet that if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. He seemed to be an incredible human being that touched a lot of people's lives in really positive ways.
It's funny, like that kind of individual who is so creative. It did seem like everybody was just willing to bend over backwards to try to help him see his vision through, even when he would get grumpy or temperamental. Because, creative minds, they're like that. When you're trying to get something out of this damn brain of ours, onto paper or film or, music or whatever, sometimes it could be so frustrating because there's so many moving pieces. You've got limited time, limited budgets, or simply trying to translate, trying to communicate what those creative ideas are. There was a couple shots of him on set where he's like, well, what if we do it this way? What if we do that? And sometimes when you're in the presence of somebody who's creative and they're trying to express something, drumming up the patience and putting on the listening ears to try to understand what they want, what they're getting after, isn't easy. And he seemed like a guy who was so loved and so respected that people were just willing to be like, dude, I'm trying, let's try to do this so that we can make some magic here. That's somebody special when it's, man, I understand this person is just trying to do their damnedest. They have a vision and I respect them and like them so much that I want to see them see it through, as opposed to just, well, he's being a dick, I don't want to help him. Yeah, that's a special individual right there.
Yep,
we lost a really special individual.
We did.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this retrospective of the Bray Wyatt documentary. Let us know what you guys thought about it in the comments below. And until next time, we'll see you around.
Goodbye.